All right, we are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. News Channel 5 legal analyst Nick Leonardo with us, talking about a number of high-profile cases here in the Middle Tennessee area. The number 737-7587 if you want to jump in. Let's real quickly go to Jim, who waited through the break, Nick, and see what he has to say. Jim, good morning. Hi, Jim.
Good morning. Just on the Hambrick case, there's a couple of issues that I think are really important. And one is that did he have a gun in his hand as he was running, which the police say he was, and it looks like from the videos that he had something in his hand. He kept looking back. Then they said they found a gun laying beside him when he was shot. Did the police place that gun there? If he legitimately had a gun the whole time and was told to drop it and he was looking back, I think it's going to be hard to convict this policeman for murder. The other issue is, and I know that you can't bring this out, but nobody seems to want to talk about it, that in 8 years he'd had 10 felony convictions. And 2 of those previous felony convictions, one of them only 4 months before, was carrying a gun as a convicted felon. And everybody on TV kept talking about this guy being such a wonderful kid. And he had 10 felony convictions in 8 years. My question a lot of times is, why was he even out on the street? But the gun issue, I think, is going to be the key to this trial. When they're claiming, the family's claiming he didn't have a gun, but it looked like he had something in his hand. He was running and looking back, and I'd just like y'all's opinion on the gun issue.
Sure. Well, the video really is going to come into play, and I know the defense. I've talked to David Rabin, and he's testified to this. They're working hard on kind of augmenting the video to get closer looks, to look exactly where things were pointed in his hand and how that. Now, there's been no evidence that any law enforcement officer planted a weapon or anything along those lines. The big question is whether or not the weapon was being pointed back toward Delkey or not.
Well, and I think it's important to know where the gun was. Was the gun in his hand, or was the gun in his waistband? Obviously, depending on which side you're on, okay? I mean, you know, I think the defense is going to work very, very diligently to enhance these video images to try to get a good image that would make their case to show, because it's their position that he had a firearm in his hand at the time that he was running, and I believe that that's a central issue to this entire case.
As far as prior bad acts, and you've talked about this with me plenty of times, the priors for Hambrick. First of all, we don't know, I don't believe that Delkey was necessarily aware of his past at that point. Which is
very important.
It's one thing if you know you're chasing someone who's got a very dangerous past, then that changes your mindset. If you're chasing someone, they're running, yeah, you assume they've done something bad, that's a little different. Okay, so we don't know, I don't think necessarily, what Delkey knew for sure about Hambrick. But regardless, the fact that he had these priors, does that come into play in your mind? Or would it be allowed to come into play at all at trial?
Gosh, that's a great question. You know, one of the things that they're going to look at is, you know, that 1985 statute on the use of force by police. And one of the things that is examined is whether or not, you know, police have a monopoly on the use of deadly force as compared to you and I, as I said earlier. And one of the things is that it does allow for a police officer to shoot a fleeing felon even if they're unarmed. But again, did he know that this individual was a felon? And I think that's going to go to the very heart of whether or not this statute is going to come into play and how much teeth the statute's going to have. But at the end of the day, I don't think that that comes into play or necessarily should come into play because someone has prior felony convictions. Doesn't give anyone the right, a police officer or anyone else, to just shoot that person. I mean, I mean, look at all the.
You have to look in the vacuum of that moment. What's going on.
And what the officer actually knew.
What about the other part? We've had a few messages on Facebook on this. All right, aside from whether or not you believe that Hambrick pointed the gun back toward him or something along those lines, could you also make the argument, even if he never did that, if Delkey feels he's armed and he's running that direction, he knows he has other officers coming from the other way, there could be children down that direction. In his mind, is that a viable argument to say, well, look, I myself didn't really maybe feel threatened myself, but I knew it was a dangerous situation. He was going to get away. I needed to take him down because you never know what he's going to do when he goes around the corner and runs into maybe officers who are coming to help me. That's a scenario. Could that be an argument, even though maybe, you know, you don't say that, well, he was in danger, but anyone in front of Hambrick could have been?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think, obviously if there's some sort of image, and I haven't seen this, but if Mr. Hambrick is turned and he has a gun pointed at the police officer's, case closed, right? I mean, but we don't see that in the video. So I think he would say that, this could turn deadly at a split second. He doesn't have a knife, he has a firearm, and he's looking back. Okay, all he's got to do is turn and start shooting. But and then taking it a step further would be the defense of third parties. Okay, I think there was a school nearby, it was a residential area, something bad could have happened. And I think at the preliminary hearing, I heard some of your reporting here at Channel 5 that there was another officer coming around the other way. So, if he'd have kept running in a matter of 30 seconds, there would have been, another bad situation unfold if indeed he did have a firearm on his person.
All right, a couple other cases people have been messaging us about. The Joe Clyde Daniels case, of course, that one is another one. The wheels of justice turn slow, and that trial is scheduled for February now, I believe, of next year. Joe Daniels, the father, charged with homicide. The mother, Crystal Daniels, still charged with reckless child endangerment. And the body of Joe Clyde has never been found. Are they still looking for his remains? Absolutely. Is there going to be a lead? Could something turn up the way they found Holly Bobo's remains, several years after she disappeared? Possibly could. He'll have been missing, Joe Clyde will, a year come April. And how important is it, as we sit here right now, having a body for the prosecution of that case? One other point on that, by the way, Nick, is I've been told that whatever little physical evidence they may have been able to acquire, maybe spots of blood that they found maybe on the father's pants, maybe what they found in the trunk, they, I've heard, do not have any Joe Clyde Daniels DNA.
Oh, wow.
They went to his toothbrush. Wow. They went to his brush at home for his hair. They looked, from what I understand, is they do not have a viable sample of Joe Clyde Daniels' DNA to compare against any physical evidence. So they can't say if it's his or not. I mean, without having that, it's kind of hard to imagine they couldn't find any of his DNA in this house. But how big a deal not having any Joe Clyde evidence, DNA, and his remains are still missing to prosecute this case? All you have is the father's confession, which he's recanted.
Well, and it's big, right? I mean, obviously he's going to recant the confession, but I mean, look at Perry March. Okay, I mean, it was a similar sort of situation, but I mean, I know that the pretrial incarceration is so unpleasant. I believe that they recently had filed some motions to be housed.
They wanted him moved out of Riverbend because he's losing all this weight and claims he's not getting some of the help he needs.
Well, and and maybe they will essentially kind of sweat another confession out of him, or maybe the mother will turn on him. I mean, the prosecution is they're smart. I mean, they work hard at this, and who's to say that the people that they had around the father weren't planted there as inmates to somehow, maybe to get another confession, just like we saw in the Perry March case. So I mean, it's important. The state would love to have a body. They would love to have a DNA. And if that's true, if the confession gets suppressed or thrown out, then the prosecution, without DNA, without an eyewitness, without a confession, I think they'll have a hard time proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the parents are responsible. But it's not over yet.
Well, another question on another case. The last one we did gavel to gavel was the Holly Bobo murder case, and we know Zach Adams was convicted, and Dylan Adams is locked up as well. The third defendant, the ace witness for the prosecution, Jason Autry, remains at Riverbend Maximum Security Prison. You and I both, I think, agree that he cut some kind of deal.
Sure,
all right?
Sure.
But he's not gotten out yet. And one reason I've heard is that they were waiting for the transcripts and the appeals to be filed, and they're not going to release him until they're sure any appeal against Zach Adams and others is gone, and that's why he stays behind bars still. Is that why this keeps dragging on? Well,
I think that's smart. I mean, there was a lot of 404B is what lawyers call it from that trial. A lot of, I think, maybe improper prior bad acts that were introduced at trial.
So you think there may be some grounds for an appeal?
I think there's a lot of grounds under that for an appeal, and then if the case was overturned and then you let Mr. Autry or his brother go, then you don't have witnesses. I mean, I think Autry's testimony was, one of the biggest things that got Zach Adams was that testimony. And so I think it's smart on behalf of the state to see that if this conviction is affirmed, then we can deal with, are we going to let these other two out? Are we going to go ahead and move forward with some sort of plea deal? And I think that the prosecutor, the head prosecutor, Jennifer
Nichols,
yes, she just recently got appointed appointed as judge by Governor Haslam. So she would no longer be on that case. That's right.
So it'll be another one. And Jennifer Thompson, still the attorney for Zach, dealing with that. So that's where it stands. As far as Autry's concerned, though, I don't have a problem with him sitting there still behind bars, because if you heard the testimony during that case, that dude was there. He may not have been the actual one that pulled the trigger, but he was there, and he was going to help dispose of the body, and he was he shouldn't get out anytime soon, in my opinion. But I have no doubt that there's been some kind of deal, because without his testimony, I don't think they get the convictions they got.
And the question is, is there an actual deal, or are you hoping to get consideration for the testimony that you are going to provide? I mean, when you listen to him talk and testify on how cold and callous and really kind of cruel this guy is, I mean, I don't want him on the streets of Decatur County or Davidson County, quite frankly. That guy was very cold and calculated when he was testifying about what happened to Miss Bobo.
Yep, someone just messaged, Autry's a dangerous man. I hope he never gets out. He's going to probably get out, but hopefully not for a while. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, Katie and others, if you're on hold, we'll get to your phone calls. Our final segment with Nick on some of these cases, covering a lot of ground, and we're streaming live on Facebook at newschannel5.com. If you have any questions there, hit me up and we'll get those as soon as we come back.